The rental process in Mexico can be very confusing and overwhelming, and a lot of expats are left with rentals that they don't absolutely love or with costly mistakes because they didn't know what questions to ask before signing a lease. So today, I'm going to share with you the top questions you should be asking before renting a home in Mexico. Hi, my name is Mariana and I run Mexico Relocation Guide. We are your expert guide to living and retiring in Mexico. Now let's get started with our first question to ask before signing a lease in Mexico. Always ask what's included. You know, just because a house says that it's fully furnished doesn't mean that it'll have an oven, doesn't mean it'll have a fridge, doesn't mean it'll actually have any furniture. So just always ask what's included. Does it have a stove? Does it have a microwave? Does it have a refrigerator? Are there going to be any utensils left behind? What about linens, pillows? Are there going to be mattresses for you to be able to sleep on? These things seem like they would be pretty self-explanatory for a listing that says it's fully furnished. But never assume that the house is fully furnished just because it says so. A lot of Mexican homes, especially in the lower budgets, tend to have smaller kitchens and they only usually have a cooktop, not really a range, it doesn't have an oven. So you should always ask if that's something that's important to you. And also, just because a listing has furniture in the pictures, don't assume that any of those furniture pieces are going to be left behind. A lot of listings will leave furniture in the photos from when somebody lived there, and come to find out, people have rented homes sight unseen, thinking that the pictures are an actual representation of what that house is going to look like today, only to come to find out that when they moved in, it was absolutely empty. Or maybe they furnished it with totally different furniture. So before you ever sign a lease, make sure that you look at the house and always ask what's included. Another common thing that you'll see on some listings is when they say that all utilities are covered. They'll cover water, electricity, gas, and other utilities like internet. But never assume that you just get unlimited amounts. In many cases, they might limit how much electricity consumption they'll pay. And then after a certain amount, you'll be responsible for the rest. In some cases, gas is included, but only at a certain amount also. So you have to make sure you find out if there's a propane tank on site or if there's a direct line to the home and who's going to be responsible for filling that every month. Another thing you should really pay attention to is the internet speed. A quick and easy solution for this is to pull up an internet speed testing platform. There's many of them online. If you just Google test my speed, test my internet speed, you can stand in a home and find out exactly what your internet speed is. Of course, you have to be connected to their Wi-Fi. And another solution for you to know how much utilities are going to be is to ask the landlord or rental agent if you can get a copy of the most current tenants' utility bills, including electricity, water, internet, gas, just so you get an idea of the typical consumption. And again, always ask if there's a cap. Have you ever heard of the word Tinaco? What does that even mean? It's a very common word when you start looking for rentals in Mexico. And you should never, ever rent a house without a tinaco or a reserve water tank, as it's known in English. This is really important because towards the end of the rainy season, you might not have enough water pressure in your home, making it impossible or really hard for you to wash dishes or shower or brush your teeth, do everyday things like that. Depending on where you end up living, during the dry season, usually January through April, some cities even cut water. So having a tinaco or a water tank reserve will ensure that you have good water pressure year-round. Many people don't know this, but having washer and dryer hookups in a Mexican home is not typical all around Mexico. So before you rent a house, make sure you find out, one, does it come with a washer and dryer? Or two, if you were to go out and get one, would you be able to hook it up? This is especially important if you don't want to be going to the laundromat and washing your clothes by hand. So always ask if there's a washer and dryer included. Another important question to ask is, does it have a water heater? This is known as a boiler. And a boiler ensures that the water just passes through this tank, heats up the water and makes it hot available throughout the house. Now, just because there's a boiler or a water heater in the home, don't assume that it's connected to every faucet in the home. It's very typical in a Mexican home for only the showers to have hot water. The best way you can do this is always visit the house that you're looking to rent in person, run the water throughout the entire home, and make sure that water comes out. And second, make sure that the areas where you want it to come out hot does actually have hot water running through it. Now, if you move to a warmer coastal area, you should absolutely find out if the house you're renting includes air conditioning. Most of the houses in really warm coastal areas usually have an air conditioner in one bedroom. It's not common to have an air conditioner in every single room. These air conditioning units are called mini splits, and they're mounted on a wall where you can usually plug it into an outlet on the wall. Now, in the central highlands of Mexico, it gets pretty chilly during the day, and at night it gets even chillier. So air conditioning is not typical, if at all. It's very rare, actually. But mini splits do tend to have a heating component. So if that's important to you, or you know that you run very cold and you're gonna live in the central highlands where it gets down to the 40s at night, then you should ask if your rental has a mini split and if it has a heating component to it. Another question that's important to ask for a rental in Mexico is what services are included. You see, in Mexico, some single family homes come with a gardener or a maid, or sometimes both. And if this is usually included in your rent, you'd want to know that beforehand, because otherwise you're responsible for paying that person their daily wage. If they come once a week, a normal wage is 300 pesos a day for a house cleaner. That's about $15 depending on the exchange rate. Some rentals may come with both. So before you ever sign a lease, make sure you find out what services are included with your rental and who's responsible for paying them. Now, if you rent a condo or a townhome in a gated community, also known as a fraccionamiento, there may be some maintenance fees included. For example, in the US, it's very common for you to have an HOA if you lived in a gated community. In Mexico, this is known as mantenimiento. Mantenimiento usually covers things like green areas, parks, barbecue areas, a pool if there is one, 24-hour gated security, things like that that are common to the entire complex. So make sure you find out before signing a lease if your mantenimiento or maintenance is included in the rent. If it's not, make sure you find out exactly how much it is per month and when you're supposed to pay it. This next question is a big one because a lot of people just assume, don't ask, and then they're surprised. So before you rent or before you sign a lease in Mexico, always ask who is responsible for any repairs. It's not uncommon in a lot of expat cities or a lot of popular expat communities for damages up to a certain amount to be covered by the tenant, and then after a certain amount to be covered by the landlord. This helps. It's kind of a win-win situation for you as a tenant to not have to go to your landlord for any little thing like, a broken light fixture. But it also protects you as a tenant in case your water heater stops working. Many rental agencies will work this into your contract and explain really well what you're responsible for and what the landlord is responsible for. But don't assume anything. Make sure you ask a lot of questions and find out what is a small repair, what's a big repair, how much are you responsible for before the landlord has to pay anything. Another question you might not know to ask until you're asked to sign a lease is, what about an aval or a fiador? A fiador or an aval is somebody who can basically sign or co-sign the lease with you, stating that if for whatever reason you can't pay your rent, they will then have to pay rent for you. This is usually very common in bigger cities like Querétaro, Guadalajara, Mexico City. And if you're renting a home in a very densely expat populated area like Ajijic, Chapala, Puerto Vallarta, San Miguel de Allende, or these common popular expat cities, then it'll probably be less common. And this gives a lot of expats a big headache because a fiador or an aval needs to be somebody who not only lives in Mexico, but owns unmortgaged property and has some assets that they can show as collateral in case you default on your rent. Now, just because somebody needs a fiador or an aval doesn't mean you can't work around it. In fact, a lot of expats in these larger cities where this is needed have worked around it. They usually pay maybe a higher security deposit, or maybe they pay, a few months up front. This is just to show the landlord that, one, you have the funds to cover your rent, and two, that you have some serious skin in the game. You're not going to default on leaving 3 months up front on rent. So there are workarounds on that. Now, I highly recommend working with a reputable rental agent who can help you navigate, help negotiate this for you, and understands Mexican culture really well. That way, you're not taken advantage of. So a lot of people don't know somebody like this in Mexico. What do? There are companies who will give you or sell you a Fianza de arrendamiento. And what that is basically a insurance policy that the company will then cover if you default on your rent. But before you sign a lease in Mexico and before you sign this Fianza de arrendamiento, make sure you understand exactly what the terms are, how you're protected. Now, what if you have pets? You should always ask, is the rental pet friendly? Before you sign a lease, make sure you find out how many pets can you bring in? What are the terms of your pet condition? Is there a pet deposit needed? And if so, how much is it? And do you get it back if you turn in the house in the same condition that you rented it in? Many condos, especially fraccionamientos or gated communities, have certain rules and restrictions around pets. For example, some homes in certain sections will not allow pets. And this is to prevent maybe barking or noises associated with having a dog, for example. And again, just because a rental says that it's not pet friendly doesn't mean there aren't workarounds. This is Mexico after all, so everything, well, almost everything is negotiable. If you want to ask if your pet can be in your home, you should just ask. Most landlords or rental agents may ask for just a higher deposit. Nothing is off the table. If you like a rental, it's a really good opportunity and you have a few pets or maybe just one pet and they're pretty well behaved, just ask if you can have them in the home. And usually a rental agent or a reputable rental company will help you negotiate all of this into your contract terms. Other restrictions you might not be aware of in your fraccionamiento that you should ask before signing a lease is, where do I take my dog out to use the bathroom? Asking the right questions will ensure that, one, you don't have any last minute surprises, two, you don't get any fees that you weren't expecting, and three, that everyone in your neighborhood gets along pretty well. And finally, the last question you should ask, and I touched on this earlier, but I really do feel like it deserves its entire topic, is to never ever rent a house in Mexico sight unseen. You may look at a property online and the 10 to 12 pictures it has of it looks amazing, right? But what you don't see are the roosters that live next door that crow all day, the dogs that live in the neighbor's yard or on the top of the roof that just bark all day, or you may not even know that there's a mechanic shop 2 doors down that makes a lot of noise on a Saturday or Sunday morning or any morning whatsoever. But whatever you do, never rent a house in Mexico without seeing it first. I've heard so many different stories of people who rented a house because it looked like it was the best deal ever and inventory was low because maybe it was snowbird season. They got to the house and they hated everything about it. It was not as advertised. Nobody told them that there was a big shop, a big carniceria next door, which is a butcher shop, and it smelled. So never rent a home in Mexico without seeing it first. A really good way to solve this is to drive through the neighborhood and around the home at different times of the day. Drive during the morning, see what it's like. What are the noises? What's the typical traffic like? Drive in the middle of the day, see what businesses are around and how noisy are they. Drive at night and see, are the dogs barking all day? Or are there other animals that are making a lot of noise? Or do your neighbors like to party a lot? And if you absolutely have to rent a house without seeing it first for whatever your circumstances, make sure that you at least have somebody locally go around and take a look at it. That way you can have at least some eyes and some feet on the ground to give you their perspective. And even when you do all your due diligence and ask all the right questions, I still really recommend working with a reputable rental agent. Not only will a rental agent work for you in your best interest, but they can give you his advice on that neighborhood, what they like about it, maybe what the traffic is like on different times of the year. They can also give you their insight into the contract terms, seeing if they are in your best interest. They'll help you translate your contract into English from Spanish, and they'll work in your best interest to make sure that you're not getting price gouged on the rental. And in our complete Mexico relocation guide, we give you a list of all the recommended rental agents that we have throughout Mexico, so that way you know that you're working with someone reputable, someone that's been vetted, and someone that actually has some inventory and knowledge in the market. You know, in Mexico, anybody could just say that they're a real estate agent. So anybody could just wake up tomorrow and say that they're a real estate agent. So it's really important that you do your homework and work with only the people that are reputable, well-known, and trustworthy. So I hope this video has been useful and now you feel more confident about looking for a rental and knowing what questions to ask. And if you want more information about our complete Mexico relocation guide, check the comments for a link. My name is Mariana and I'll see you in the next video.